February 15th, 1942. A cramped laboratory at the Telecommunications Research Establishment near Swanage, England. Joan Curran's hands moved with practiced precision as her household scissors sliced through sheets of aluminum foil, creating hundreds of thin metallic strips. The 26-year-old Welsh physicist had been working for months on an idea that her colleagues thought might change the course of the war. She packaged the foil strips carefully, preparing them for what would become one of the most important experiments in military history. Later that day, an aircraft from Christchurch Aerodrome would carry these simple metal fragments into the sky, and radar stations on the ground would watch their screens in amazement. What they saw would prove that a simple countermeasure could blind the most sophisticated German radar systems. But Joan Curran's brilliant invention would not be used to save lives for another 17 months, suppressed by fear and institutional resistance that would cost thousands of Allied airmen their lives. The delay of window, as her invention was codenamed, represents one of the most controversial decisions of the Second World War. When finally deployed over Hamburg in July 1943, this rejected technology would transform the air war and demonstrate that sometimes the most powerful weapons are ideas that powerful men were too afraid to use. The story begins not with rejection, but with desperation. By early 1942, RAF Bomber Command faced a crisis that threatened to end Britain's only offensive capability against Nazi Germany. Every night, hundreds of British bombers flew into hostile skies, and every night, German radar-guided defences slaughtered them with terrifying efficiency. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. Bomber crews faced operational mortality rates that made survival almost impossible. Statistics gathered by Bomber Command painted a picture of systematic annihilation. In the 12 months preceding Joan Curran's experiments with metal foil, RAF bomber losses had reached catastrophic levels. During 1941, 532 Canadian and Commonwealth airmen died in Bomber Command operations. That number more than tripled in 1942, soaring to 1,809 deaths. Crew members calculated their chances of completing a 30-operation tour at approximately 16%. Young men in their early 20s performed complex calculations in their bunks, working out that statistically they would not survive their fifth mission. Flight Sergeant James Murray, a Lancaster pilot with No. 12 Squadron, kept a journal that survived the war. His entry from March 1942 captured the mood with devastating clarity. "We lost another crew tonight, Johnson and his boys. Good men. That makes 7 crews from our squadron in the last month. The new crews arrive looking eager. By their third operation they have the look. The one where you realize you're probably not going home. We need something. Some edge. Right now, German radar finds us every time. Their fighters are on us before we know they're there. We're flying to our deaths and we know it." Murray would complete 28 operations before his Lancaster was shot down over Cologne in November 1942. He survived as a prisoner, but 5 members of his 7-man crew died in the crash. The killing efficiency of German air defences came from a technological revolution that Britain had pioneered but Germany had perfected. Radar, the revolutionary technology that had saved Britain during the Battle of Britain, had become the weapon destroying Bomber Command. The German air defence system, called the Kammhuber line after its architect General Josef Kammhuber, represented the most sophisticated defensive network ever constructed. It stretched from Denmark to the Swiss border, creating an invisible electronic wall that could track British bombers from the moment they crossed the coast. At the heart of this system were radar installations of remarkable precision. The Würzburg radar, a dish-shaped detector mounted on a rotating platform, could track individual aircraft with accuracy measured in meters. These stations networked with searchlight batteries and anti-aircraft guns to create killing zones where bombers flew into walls of exploding steel. More deadly still were the night fighters. German Messerschmitt Bf 1-10 and Junkers Ju-88 aircraft equipped with Liechtenstein airborne radar could hunt British bombers in total darkness. Ground controllers would vector these predators toward bomber streams using data from Würzburg installations. Once within range, the fighter's own radar would lock onto individual bombers, guiding them to point-blank range where their cannon could devastate aluminum fuselage and fuel tanks. British bomber crews invented myths about what they witnessed because accepting the truth that German night fighters could find them anywhere in the darkness was too terrifying to contemplate. Into this desperate situation came Joan Curran, whose background gave no hint of the revolutionary impact she would have on the war. Born Joan Elizabeth Struthers in Swansea, Wales, on February 26, 1916, she was the daughter of an optician. She excelled at Swansea Girls' High School, demonstrating remarkable aptitude for mathematics and physics. In 1934, she won an open scholarship to Newnham College, Cambridge, one of the few women's colleges at a university that would not grant degrees to women until 1948. She studied physics with intensity, developing what colleagues would later describe as extraordinary skill at delicate experimental work, combined with an ability to see solutions others missed. After completing her studies in 1938, she was awarded a government grant to pursue advanced research at the Cavendish Laboratory, where she joined a research team led by Philip D. and met a young Scottish physicist named Joan Curran. The two worked exceptionally well together. They married in November 1940, just as Britain's war situation grew increasingly desperate. The declaration of war had caught Joan's research team at an unexpected moment. Philip D. had proposed spending a month at the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough Airfield. They arrived on September 1, 1939. 2 days later, Britain declared war on Germany. Instead of returning to Cambridge, the team was immediately redirected to war work. Joan and Sam joined a group developing proximity fuses, revolutionary devices that would allow anti-aircraft shells to explode when they detected an aircraft nearby. This work took them to a top-secret radar research centre, where they developed a successful design that would later prove crucial in defending against German rockets. But it was Joan's next assignment that would change everything. In November 1940, both Currans were transferred to the Telecommunications Research Establishment near Swanage. Sam worked on centimetric radar development while Joan was assigned to the countermeasures group in an adjoining laboratory. This placement would prove pivotal. The countermeasures group had a specific mission: find ways to defeat or confuse enemy radar. By late 1940, it was clear that radar had become the decisive technology of air warfare. Whichever side could see in the darkness and through clouds would control the night sky. Several scientists had suggested theoretical countermeasures. As early as 1937, British researcher Gerald Touch had suggested that metal objects might overwhelm radar systems with false echoes, RV. Jones, the brilliant young physicist who headed scientific intelligence, had suggested that pieces of metal foil falling through the air might create such false echoes. But these were theoretical concepts. No one had tested whether the idea would actually work in practice. That practical development fell to Joan Curran. She approached the problem with characteristic precision. Her first task was to understand exactly how German radar worked. This required detailed analysis of radar frequencies, information that came from signals intelligence, photo reconnaissance, and captured equipment. The most crucial intelligence came from a daring commando raid. On the night of February 27th to 28th, 1942, Major John Frost led 120 paratroopers in an assault on a German radar station on the French coast near Le Havre. Under intense fire, a technical team dismantled key components of a Würzburg radar while other paratroopers held off German reinforcements. They fought their way to the beach where Royal Navy boats evacuated them. 2 paratroopers were killed, 6 wounded, 6 captured. But they brought back the prize, a complete Würzburg radar system that would reveal exactly what British scientists needed to defeat it. Examination of the captured equipment revealed crucial information. All German radars operated in just 3 frequency bands. This made them vulnerable. If Joan could create reflectors tuned to those specific frequencies, she could create false echoes that German radar operators would find impossible to distinguish from real aircraft. The physics was straightforward. When a radar wave strikes a metal strip that is exactly half that wavelength, the strip acts as a resonant antenna, absorbing radar energy and re-radiating it to create a strong return echo. A single strip produces a modest echo, but thousands of strips, each fluttering and tumbling as they fall, create a massive cloud of echoes that swamps radar screens with false targets. Joan began experimenting systematically. She tried wires of different lengths and thicknesses, sheets of different sizes. Each configuration was tested to measure how effectively it reflected radar energy. Her laboratory notebooks from this period show hundreds of tests, each carefully documented. She soon found that sheets were too heavy and fell too quickly. Wires were promising but difficult to deploy in needed quantities. She needed something lightweight enough to float in the air for several minutes, yet simple enough to manufacture in massive quantities and easy for bomber crews to deploy while under fire at night. Her solution was elegant. Strips of black paper exactly 27 centimeters long and 2 centimeters wide, with thin aluminum foil glued to one side. The black paper provided structural stability and the right weight for a slow, fluttering descent. The aluminum foil provided radar reflection. The dimensions were critical. At 27 centimeters, the strips were exactly half the wavelength of the German Würzburg radar, meaning each strip would resonate perfectly with the radar signal. Each strip weighed almost nothing. A bundle of 2,200 strips weighed just 1 pound. A single bomber could carry hundreds of bundles without any meaningful impact on performance or bomb load. The deployment method was equally straightforward. Bomber crews would drop bundles through the flare chute at 1-minute intervals. The bundles would separate in the airstream, releasing their strips to create a cloud of radar reflectors behind the bomber. Multiple bombers would create an enormous radar cloud that would completely obscure the bomber stream. In February 1942, Joan was ready to test her invention. She organized a test flight from Christchurch Aerodrome and arranged for observers at multiple radar detection stations to monitor what happened when the strips were dropped. Her husband Sam later recalled the moment with vivid clarity. The effects on the radar screens were truly amazing, and it looked as if a large fleet of aircraft was present. This first demonstration of window was clearly of outstanding importance to the whole of radar science. The test was completely successful. Joan Curran's metal-coated paper strips created radar echoes indistinguishable from actual bombers. A single aircraft dropping strips created radar signatures, suggesting a formation of dozens of aircraft. Radar operators could not tell the difference. Radar-guided searchlights wandered aimlessly. Radar-directed anti-aircraft guns could not track targets. Night fighters guided by ground controllers could not be vectored to intercepts. By April 1942, just 2 months after the successful test, Joan Curran's invention was complete, tested, and ready for operational use. The head of TREAP, Rowe, assigned it the codename Window. Production could begin immediately. The technology was so simple that any paper manufacturer could produce the strips in massive quantities. Deployment required no special equipment. Training bomber crews would take only minutes. RAF Bomber Command could begin using Window within weeks. The technology worked. It was ready, and then it was rejected. The decision to suppress Window for 17 months represents one of the most controversial calls of the entire war. The objection came primarily from Professor Frederick Lindemann, Churchill's chief scientific advisor. Lindemann, known as the Prof, was a brilliant physicist who had Churchill's complete trust. His argument against using Window was seemingly logical. If the RAF used Window against German radar, the Luftwaffe would immediately understand the principle. German scientists would find the strips, analyze them, and determine how they worked. Within weeks, Germany would be manufacturing its own version. The Luftwaffe could then use their version against British radar defences, blinding fighter command and anti-aircraft command. Britain had already endured the Blitz in 1940 and 1941, when German bombers killed 40,000 civilians. If German bombers returned with a technology that blinded British defences, the Luftwaffe might launch a new Blitz with devastating effect. His position found support in fighter command and anti-aircraft command. Air Chief Marshal Sir Sholto Douglas, commanding fighter command, argued strenuously against Window. His night fighters depended on radar to find German raiders. If Window rendered these systems ineffective, Britain would be defenceless against night attack. Anti-aircraft command made similar arguments. Their gun-laying radars used systems similar to those employed by the Germans. If Window could blind German radars, it could equally blind British ones. The dispute went to the War Cabinet. Arthur Harris, who had taken command of Bomber Command in February 1942, argued passionately for permission to use Window. His men were dying. Bomber losses were unsustainable. He had a technology that could dramatically reduce casualties. Every night he delayed using Window. Men died who could have been saved. In operations from July through December 1942, Bomber Command flew 69,000 sorties and lost 1,953 aircraft, a casualty rate of approximately 2.8% per sortie. At that rate, a bomber had just a 30% chance of completing a 30-operation tour. But the War Cabinet sided with Lindemann. In the strategic calculus of 1942, defending Britain from potential German attack took priority over improving the effectiveness of Bomber Command. Window would not be used. Harris did not give up. Throughout 1942 and into early 1943, he repeatedly requested permission to use window. Each time, he was refused. R.V. Jones, who understood both technical and strategic issues as well as anyone in Britain, saw the decision as disastrous. He argued forcefully that the Germans almost certainly already knew about chaff. The physics was too simple, the concept too obvious. German scientists had certainly thought of the same idea. Jones was right. Unknown to the British at the time, German scientists had independently developed their own version of window. They called it Doppel, named after the Berlin suburb where they conducted their tests. German Duppel was similar to British window, strips of aluminum-coated paper cut to specific wavelengths to create false radar echoes. The Germans had tested Duppel in 1942 and found it worked perfectly, but Hermann Göring, commanding the Luftwaffe, had prohibited its use for exactly the same reason Lindemann objected to window, fear that the British would copy it. The situation was extraordinary. Both sides had invented the same radar countermeasure. Both sides knew it worked. Both sides refrained from using it for fear the other would retaliate. For over a year, this curious standoff continued while airmen on both sides died unnecessarily. In 1943, Canadian casualties in Bomber Command reached 3,031, more than triple the previous year's losses. The breakthrough came from multiple directions. By spring 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic was turning in the Allies' favour. The bulk of the Luftwaffe's bomber force had been transferred to the Eastern Front. Large-scale raids on Britain had virtually ceased. The Luftwaffe no longer possessed the bomber strength to launch a new blitz, even if window did blind British defences. British radar technology had also advanced. Centimetric radar, operating at much shorter wavelengths, was coming into service with fighter command. These new radars would be far less susceptible to window-type countermeasures. Harris argued persuasively that far more British bombers were now heading to Germany every night than German bombers were heading to Britain. The balance had shifted decisively. On July 15, 1943, more than 15 months after Joan Curran's successful tests, the War Cabinet authorised operational use of window. Harris was given permission to deploy it on an operation of his choice to evaluate its effectiveness. He chose Operation Gomorrah, the bombing of Hamburg. Hamburg was Germany's second-largest city and Europe's largest port. Its shipyards had built the battleship Bismarck. Its U-boat pens threatened Allied convoys. Its refineries supplied fuel for the Wehrmacht. Most importantly, Hamburg was heavily defended. Würzburg radars ringed the city, controlling dense concentrations of anti-aircraft guns and searchlights. Night fighter bases nearby meant the Kammhuber line concentrated its defences around Hamburg's approaches. If window worked anywhere, it would work here. The first raid was scheduled for the night of July 24, 1943. Crews from No. 76 Squadron received special briefing on deploying window. Drop bundles through the flare chute at 1-minute intervals using a stopwatch. Each bundle contained 2,200 strips. Each bomber would carry several dozen bundles. At 21:45 on July 24th, bombers began taking off from bases across eastern England. 791 aircraft in total, carrying 2,300 tons of bombs. They formed up over England and set course for Germany. As they approached the German coast, window deployment began. On the ground in Germany, radar operators watched their screens in growing confusion and alarm. Instead of discrete blips representing individual bombers, their screens filled with thousands of echo returns. The neat, organized picture that allowed precise tracking and fighter intercepts dissolved into electronic chaos. The Würzburg radars that controlled searchlights and flak batteries could not lock onto targets. The radar-guided master searchlights wandered aimlessly across the sky. Anti-aircraft guns, deprived of precise radar ranging, fired almost randomly or held fire entirely. Night fighters found only empty sky. Their airborne Liechtenstein radars, swamped with false returns, could not lock onto individual bombers. General Josef Kammhuber watched helplessly as his entire system collapsed. The bombers reached Hamburg virtually unopposed. At approximately 1 minute past midnight on July 25th, the first bombs began falling. Pathfinder aircraft marked the target with coloured flares. Main force bombers following behind dropped their loads. High explosive bombs to blast open roofs and walls. Incendiary bombs to start fires. Block after block erupted in flame. The raid lasted nearly 50 minutes. 728 bombers dropped their loads. 1,500 civilians died that first night. But the true measure of Window's success was the damage not done to Bomber Command. Of 791 bombers dispatched, only 12 failed to return, a loss rate of 1.5%. On previous raids of similar size, losses typically ran between 4 and 6%. Window had reduced bomber losses by 2/3. Flight crews could scarcely believe their survival. Sergeant William Mitchell, a Lancaster wireless operator with No. 44 Squadron, wrote in his diary, "We've been given a miracle. German night fighters were nowhere. Their flak was wild, shooting at shadows. The searchlights couldn't hold us. For the first time since I started operations, I actually think I might live through this tour." Mitchell would complete 32 operations and survive the war. Bomber Command returned to Hamburg on the nights of July 27th, 29th and August 2nd. The Americans added daylight raids on July 25th and 26th. Each raid used Window. Each time, German defences remained blind. The raid on the night of July 27th to 28th created history's first firestorm in an urban area. Unusually, hot, dry weather combined with concentrated bombing to create a thermal cyclone. Fires merged into a single massive conflagration that generated its own weather system. Winds of 240 kilometers per hour pulled oxygen into the fire center. Temperatures reached 800 degrees Celsius. People in bomb shelters suffocated as the fire consumed all available oxygen. Others trying to flee were lifted off their feet by hurricane-force winds and hurled into the flames. The firestorm killed more than 40,000 people in a single night. In total, Operation Gomorrah killed an estimated 42,600 civilians, wounded 180,000, destroyed 60% of Hamburg's housing, and caused 1 million people to flee the city. Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments, later testified that the destruction shocked the Nazi leadership to its core. He told interrogators that he had advised Hitler that if the Allies repeated such attacks on 4 or 5 other German cities, Germany would collapse. But for Bomber Command, the story was about survival. Across the 4 major night raids of Operation Gomorrah, involving more than 3,000 bomber sorties, only 87 bombers were lost, compared to casualties that would have exceeded 300 without Window. 213 bomber crews, 1,491 men, survived because of Joan Curran's invention. Window became standard equipment for all Bomber Command operations. Loss rates, which had been climbing toward unsustainable levels, dropped dramatically. Analysts have estimated Window reduced bomber losses by approximately 25 to 30% across the remainder of the war. Given that Bomber Command flew hundreds of thousands of sorties between July 1943 and May 1945, this translates to thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of aircrew who completed missions they might not have otherwise survived. The German response came swiftly once Window was deployed. German scientists knew exactly what Window was the moment they found the strips after the Hamburg raid. Within weeks, Germany was manufacturing its own version using their existing Doppel design. The Luftwaffe first employed Doppel operationally in a raid on the night of October 7th to 8th, 1943. As Lindemann had predicted, it worked. British radar operators saw the same confusing cloud of false echoes, but the feared new blitz never materialized. The Luftwaffe no longer had the bomber strength to mount massive raids. Most bomber units had been transferred to the Eastern Front. Fighter Command had prepared. New centimetric radars were less susceptible to Doppel. The RAF's night fighter force had expanded dramatically. De Havilland Mosquito night fighters, equipped with excellent radar and deadly cannon, could hunt German bombers even when radar controllers lost track of them. German bombers faced impossible odds. Doppel helped them survive longer, but it could not change the fundamental balance. The fear that had delayed Window for 17 months proved largely groundless. Joan Curran herself rarely spoke publicly about her work. Her husband Sam was knighted in 1970 for his contributions to physics, and she became Lady Joan Curran. She and Sam worked on other wartime projects, including participation in the Manhattan Project in 1944, where they contributed to electromagnetic isotope separation for enriching uranium. After the war, Sam became Professor of Natural Philosophy at Glasgow University and later the first Principal and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Strathclyde. Joan devoted much of her post-war life to advocacy for disabled people. Their first child was born severely disabled, and Joan became a founding member in 1954 of the Scottish Society for the Parents of Mentally Handicapped Children, which grew to 100 branches and more than 5,000 members. R.V. Jones, the scientific intelligence chief who had fought for Windows deployment, later declared that in his opinion, Joan Curran made an even greater contribution to Allied victory than her husband's work. Yet Joan remained largely unknown outside specialist circles. She received an honorary Doctor of Letters from the University of Strathclyde in 1987, recognition that came more than 4 decades after her war work. Before Window, Bomber Command loss rates averaged between 4 and 6% per sortie. After Window, loss rates dropped to between 2 and 3%, eventually falling to approximately 2.4% by 1944. Across the hundreds of thousands of sorties flown from July 1943 through May 1945, this reduction meant thousands of bombers returned safely. Each bomber carried a crew of 7 men. The mathematics suggests Window saved between 10,000 and 15,000 aircrew lives over the course of the war. The delay in deploying Window remains controversial among historians. The men who decided to delay were not callous. They weighed genuine risks against uncertain benefits. They chose caution, prioritizing defense of Britain over protection of bomber crews. But the cost of their caution can be calculated. Between April 1942 and July 1943, approximately 3,000 bomber aircraft were lost. Statistical analysis suggests that perhaps 1/3 to 1/2 of those losses might have been prevented if Window had been deployed immediately, representing 5,000 to 10,000 young men who died while the Invention sat unused. Once Window was deployed, it changed the air war fundamentally. German defences never fully recovered. New tactics emerged. The wild sow, or wild boar system, had night fighters patrol over cities during raids, attacking bombers illuminated by fires rather than relying on radar. The Zame sow, or tame boar system, had fighters follow bomber streams and make visual attacks. These adaptations helped, but they could not restore the killing efficiency of the pre-Window Kammhuber line. German night fighter effectiveness declined permanently. Production of window strips became a major industrial effort. By late 1943, British factories were producing millions of strips daily. American bomber forces adopted the technology, calling it chaff. Window was used not just to protect bomber formations but for deception operations. On the night of June 5th to 6th, 1944, the eve of D-Day, RAF Lancaster bombers flew precise patterns over the English Channel while dropping Window in carefully controlled amounts. The pattern on German radar screens simulated a naval convoy heading toward the Pas de Calais, suggesting the invasion would come there rather than in Normandy. This deception, known as Operation Taxable, helped keep critical German divisions away from the actual Normandy invasion beaches during the crucial first hours of the assault. The physics of radar countermeasures advanced throughout the war, but the basic principle of Window remained unchanged. Modern military aircraft still carry chaff dispensers, though contemporary versions use aluminum-coated glass fibre and are deployed by explosive cartridges. The strips are cut for different wavelengths to match modern radar frequencies. But the fundamental idea Joan Curran developed in 1942 remains valid 80 years later. When a modern fighter aircraft deploys chaff to evade a surface-to-air missile, it uses technology descended directly from her work. Joan Curran died on February 10, 1999, at age 82. Obituaries noted her war work and her advocacy for disabled people, but most readers had no idea how many lives her wartime invention had saved. Today, examples of window strips are preserved in the RAF Museum. They look unremarkable, rectangular pieces of black paper with metallic coating. Yet these represent one of the most important technological developments of World War II. The story of Window is fundamentally human. It is about a young Welsh physicist whose brilliance solved a problem killing thousands of young men. It is about bomber crews who flew night after night, calculating their odds and flying anyway. It is about commanders who fought bureaucratic battles to protect their men. It is about decisions made under uncertainty, risks weighed, lives valued or undervalued. 17 months passed between successful demonstration and deployment. 17 months during which men died who might have been saved. But the story also demonstrates triumph. Joan Curran created an elegant solution that proved devastatingly effective. Her invention changed the course of the air war and remains in use today. The men who returned home because window protected their bombers went on to raise families and build careers. Their descendants exist because one woman saw a solution others missed and had the skill to make it work. The recognition Joan Curran received during her lifetime was limited. She was not awarded honours typically given to scientists who made major wartime contributions. This reflected both the secrecy surrounding window and broader patterns of how women's contributions were recognized. Her husband received a knighthood. Male scientists received honours. Joan's work, though arguably more impactful, remained largely unknown. In recent decades, historians have worked to document these overlooked contributions, ensuring Joan Curran's achievement is not forgotten. Window reveals fundamental tensions in how democracies wage war. When facing uncertainty, how does one weigh known casualties against potential future risks? The men who delayed window weighed genuine risks and chose caution. The fact that their fears proved largely groundless makes their decision tragic but not necessarily wrong given their information. But thousands died while window sat unused. In retrospect, the benefits of delay appear minimal. The feared new blitz never came. British defences would likely have coped with German use of Duple, as they did when Germany finally deployed it. The delay cost lives for little strategic gain. Joan Curran's story is about a scientist who solved a problem killing thousands. She created a solution that proved devastatingly effective, saved tens of thousands of lives, changed the air war, and remains in use today. That the invention was suppressed for 17 months is tragedy. That Joan received little recognition is injustice. But that her invention worked and remains relevant 8 decades later is triumph. From a cramped laboratory in Swanage to modern fighter aircraft over distant battlefields, Joan Curran's window continues to protect those who fly into danger. It stands as a quiet testament to a brilliant woman whose name history nearly forgot, and to the power of one person's idea to save thousands of lives.